Just unprecedented losses. Up to 62,000 Wagner soldiers have been taken out of combat fighting for Bakhmut. And as soon as they left it, the conventional Russian army is no longer able to hold it. That is why at this very moment Ukrainians are finalizing the encirclement of Bakhmut and preparing for the ultimate liberation of the city. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's get straight to the point and talk about some ridiculous Russian propaganda. So, in this first picture we have an extreme Z-Patriot with a pretty funny face and very extraordinary, to say the least, merch. He's also holding Matryoshka, which is also Z-Matryoshka, and it is just a man enjoying his best of life. And speaking about the merch, we are working on some very extremely cool projects behind the scenes, and as soon as I have any updates, I will let you all know. But to say the least, this is going to be extremely extraordinary. And also, today I have a very small anniversary, because this is my video number 1000, so yay! Thank you all so much for watching me for so long, and if you want you can go all the way to my oldest videos and see why I call everybody investors. And in order to celebrate this big milestone, can you please just like this video and subscribe to my channel? That's all I'm asking you for. This does help a lot to develop the channel even further, and I'm planning to make even more, thousands more videos. I'm not planning to stop. You can also follow me on Instagram just once again to celebrate this anniversary, because the majority of behind the scenes updates I'll be uploading right there. The link is down below, and once again thank you all so much for your support. But okay, now please allow me to give you just literally a couple of words about the Western military support to Ukraine. Then we'll go to the south and talk about more evidence of Putin's terroristic regime. Then move to the east, talk about thousands of Wagner soldiers being eliminated and Ukrainians finally encircling Bakhmut and preparing to liberate the city. And first of all, the country of Poland is planning to give 20 MiG-29 planes to Ukraine as soon as it can get a replacement from the West. Next we have yet another $1.3 billion military support package from the US to Ukraine, which will include NASAMS air defense systems, artillery shells, and what is most importantly, demining equipment. And then ultimately right here we see a picture of Ukrainians repairing their armored personnel carriers Bradleys, because unlike Russians they do not simply abandon military vehicles on the battlefields, they actually repair them and reuse them. Right, and now as promised, let's go to the south and talk about this so-called revenge of Russians for Crimean Bridge. Then we'll move to the east, talk about Wagner and Bakhmut. And so, as we go back to Odessa, for the third day straight, Russians were attacking this city, primarily residential areas. And one of the buildings which has been damaged is the Consulate General of China. So, I mean, Russians attacked even their allies in another country, besides destroying 60,000 tons of grains previously, which were destined to go also to China. But even bigger attacks, unfortunately, happened in another Ukrainian city called Mykolaiv, where several residential buildings have been severely damaged and even partially destroyed. So, I mean, yes, as you can see, for just Ukrainians attacking Crimean Bridge, which Russians used a lot to bring their reinforcements to the south of Ukraine, Russia responded by attacking civilian and residential areas for 3 days straight, and it is not yet clear if they are planning to stop. If this is not yet the evidence of terroristic regime of Putin, I don't know yet what else will be. And just overall, Ukrainians in the last 24 hours were able to intercept only 18 out of 38 aerial targets of Russians, and the ones they were not able to intercept were primarily Onyx and X-22 missiles. And the reason why they could not do it, it is because the speed of these missiles are approximately 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers per hour. And so yes, if you remember, one of the consequences of this Crimean Bridge incident is that Russia left this grain deal and then announced that every single ship going in and out of Ukrainian ports will be considered as a legitimate military target. Well, Ukrainians did their own statement, saying that every single ship going to Ukrainian ports on temporarily occupied territories in Ukraine, which belongs to Russia, so Ukraine will consider these ships as military targets as well. So I cannot wait, I cannot just think about anything else other than Russians being like, wait a second, how can you attack civilian targets? That is not allowed. So pretty much yes, these were the consequences of Crimean Bridge incident, and now allow me just a couple more words from the south of Ukraine before we move to the east. And first of all, because some of you were asking in the comments, here is your update on Kakhovka water reservoir. And as you can see from this picture, it is pretty much almost completely dry. And then, as we refer to the report by the Institute for the Study of War, the major battles in the south are happening between Zaporozhye and Donetsk regions, and also in the western Zaporozhye region. And then we have potentially some good news, because Ukraine reportedly already started to use the cluster munition from the US, as you can see from this video. Unfortunately, due to YouTube guidelines, I can only show you the aftermath of this attack, not the attack itself, but if you want to see the full uncensored version, it will be on my Patreon, link is down below, and there's still 1 week of free access. And ultimately, as we go to another major city, which is temporarily occupied by Russians, the city of Mariupol, a local factory metallurg spontaneously got caught on fire. But okay, now as promised, let's go to the east and talk about tens of thousands of Wagners being eliminated, and then we'll talk about Bakhmut being ready to be liberated. And first of all, according to the Ukrainian intelligence, approximately 3,000 Wagner soldiers entered the territory of Belarus, along with approximately 600 pieces of military equipment. And if you remember, one of their main responsibilities in this country will be to train Belarusian soldiers, but at the same time it is almost certain that Wagner are training themselves as well. And yes, just in general speaking about Wagner, looks like we have finally the official statistics from one of the commanders of Wagner itself, is that during the siege and attacks on Bakhmut, Wagner lost approximately 3/4 of its entire personnel. And if we are talking numbers, it was estimated that Wagner brought approximately 78,000 soldiers to Bakhmut alone. 22,000 of them were eliminated, and 40,000 of them were injured so much so they had to be taken away. And so whenever Wagner left the city and now they see the conventional Russian forces almost ready to give it up with almost no fight, I can only imagine how they feel. And like mentioned previously, several thousand of those survivors are right now in Belarus training, while the rest are in hotels across Russia, also resting and preparing for potentially future combat actions. And well, Ukrainians obviously prepare themselves, such as for example according to Serhiy Naev, approximately 40 kilometers of trenches have been dug on the border between Ukraine and Belarus, and approximately 30,000 mines have been installed, so in case Wagner or Belarus soldiers invade from the north, it will be extremely complicated for them to do this. But unfortunately, also speaking about Chernihiv regions, attacks of Russians were not only against the south, it was also against some cities in Chernihiv, as you can see from this image. And then even more Russian drones have been spotted in Sumy, another northern region in Ukraine. Both of these attacks were unfortunately against residential areas. And as we go to the actual east of Ukraine, according to once again report by the Institute for the Study of War, both Russians and Ukrainians were engaged in heavy battles along Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna front line, with Russians doing their best to push as hard as they can, and Ukrainians so far successfully resisting. And as you can see from this map, which shows us the changes in territorial control, this is how much land Russians were able to capture, let's call it like this, during these 3 days of offensive. And as we get closer to Bakhmut, specifically to the settlement called Orekhovo-Vasilievka, you can see that Ukrainians expanded their liberated territories a little bit, and then also an artillery firing position of Russians have been destroyed in between Paraskovivka and Krasnohora. And speaking about Bakhmut, recently Ukrainians did a 12 hours operation trying to fight for this city, and reportedly they were successful, advancing approximately 1800 meters in total across the Bakhmut front lines. And I mean, you have already seen some first-person view footage of combat activities within the city, but recently we received even this new video of a first-person view from the tank perspective, which is crushing the Russian army, forcing Russians to advance backwards and to abandon their positions, and then even according to Ukrainian soldiers, those captured Russian prisoners of war, they were completely destroyed, demoralized, and not willing to fight anymore. The full video of this tank raid will be available on my Patreon, the link is down below. Next we have some statements from the general of Ukrainian army Alexander Syrsky, who is saying that Ukrainians on average for the last several weeks are advancing anywhere between 500 to 1000 meters around Bakhmut. He's also saying that those Russian forces remaining inside the city once again are demoralized and there is no rotation between new and old forces. That is why there is a complete morale and physical exhaustion for the Russian soldiers. And for this reason, General Syrsky concludes is that the conditions for the full ultimate liberation of Bakhmut are now ready. And I mean, yes, indeed, just take a look at this map. Ukrainians control the majority of Klishivka, Yehidny and Berhivka, located to the south and to the north of Bakhmut respectively. These positions are geographically higher than Bakhmut, which allows Ukrainians to look inside the city and see all the movements of Russians. And just in general, it is way easier to attack whenever you start your advancement from all the way from the top. At the same time, for the last couple of days there was significant pressure of Ukrainians against Russians. They're able to liberate, which is not yet confirmed by this map, some significant areas, and just like mentioned previously, a lot of Russian soldiers are morally and physically exhausted, but they cannot yet retreat because there is no one simply to replace them. So whenever the actual full attack of Ukrainians will be launched, they will be barely able to resist it. And probably one last thing Ukrainians need to do to create this chain reaction of disastrous events for Russians, which will end them retreating as fast as they can from Bakhmut, is to take control over some major roads, such as for example this one which starts in Orekhovo-Vasilievka, which goes all the way to Bakhmut from the northwest. And as you can see, this is exactly the area where Ukrainians are also successful. But wait, there is more. Besides Bakhmut, Ukrainians are also relatively successful to the south of this area. Such as for example from this video, you can see Ukrainians being able to destroy a Russian self-propelled howitzer called Tulipan. And besides that, multiple assault groups of Russians, along with their 3 tanks and 6 armored personnel carriers, pretty much the entire convoy of Russians, has been destroyed near Krasnohorivka. And just in general, we have this video of a compilation of most recent destruction of Ukrainians of Russian military vehicles. And just overall, 4 concentration of Russian forces, 11 artillery units, 2 air defense systems and 1 electronic warfare system of Russians have been destroyed in the last 24 hours. And so, as you can see, as soon as Wagner left Bakhmut, the conventional Russian forces are no longer able to hold this city. Ukrainians are doing an immense pressure along the flanks and next to the major front line in Bakhmut, and they're pretty much like said Alexander Syrsky mentioned, they're ready to start the ultimate liberation of this city. And it is my personal assumption and hope that they will be able to do it sooner rather than later. And if you don't want to miss the liberation of Bakhmut, the main event probably of 2023, can you please once again subscribe to my channel? It only takes 1 click. The absolutely best way to support my work is through my Patreon. You can also become my channel member and unlock channel perks, or simply use a PayPal link. Everything can be found on the right and down below. Thank you so much for your attention, товарищи. Please follow me on Instagram, beware there are scammers in the comments, and see you tomorrow.